Welcome back to week number 2 of Remember I Am, our series on the 4 yogas. Last week we laid a foundation upon silence and awareness, and we're going to take that one step further this week with our study of Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is basically the yoga of non-doership. It is the yoga of action, flow, and oneness with life. And we said last week that the ego is the mental activity of identifying. But another simple working definition for the ego could also be the belief in personal doership. The belief that I am an independent actor, isolated from and uninfluenced by the flow of life, and therefore able to make all of my own decisions. And this is basically what karma is. It is personal involvement with the flow of life. What we typically call the person in spirituality is really just a collection of karma, of everything that the person has ever claimed as my action. Because truthfully, whatever happens through me is life's action. It is the action of the whole universe happening through this mind-body unit. But when I claim it as my action, I essentially isolate myself from the flow of life. And so, as we know, karma is what keeps the wheel of samsara going, the cycle of death and rebirth. In the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, it is said that the soul must keep reincarnating into human lifetimes until all of its karmas have been extinguished. Only then will the soul, upon leaving the body, look back upon its lifetime with no attachment left to the world of duality, and thus it's ready to graduate to the next level or grade of consciousness. And karma is what keeps the soul trapped in the cycle of samsara. So because the ego identifies with everything that's placed in front of it, it also does this with actions as well as objects. When introduced to any action, the ego will always use it to imply an actor. But upon deep investigation and contemplation of this, we never actually find an independent actor. Because all actions are simply a result of conditioning arising to meet circumstances. And both conditioning and circumstances are determined by the flow of life and totally outside of our control. But when the action happens in response to the conditioning meeting the circumstance, the ego arrogantly jumps in the middle of it and claims it as my independent action. Life didn't do that. I did that. And so you, as silent awareness, are simply witnessing these actions take place. And so non-doership is really about realizing yourself to be the whole ocean rather than just a single wave. Because the wave only does what the ocean determines it will do. Regardless of whether or not the wave may think or believe otherwise, it doesn't change the fact. The actor only does what has been written into the script. And life is the script writer, not the person. As Lord Buddha famously said, events happen and deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. Meaning, the actor and the play are one. There is no actor who can act independently from the script. And so, even though the character may feel like it's acting independently of its own free will, it is at the mercy of the script. And whatever way you slice it, the person is at the mercy of its conditioning, and it cannot behave outside of it. Only by becoming aware of our conditioning can we begin to transcend it. And so, predetermination does not mean that God sat down and decided everything he thought should happen in sequential order. It means that every wave has the whole ocean behind it. It means that everything in the universe is connected and nobody acts outside of the flow of life. The word karma literally means your own doing. And so karma is created by claiming the actions of the body as my action, and then feeling personally responsible for those actions in the form of pride and guilt. So pride and guilt are sort of the footprints left behind by karmic actions. If the actions of the body produce pleasure, the ego says, look how great my action was. And if the actions of the body produce pain, the ego says, oh, look how terrible my action was. So it is the chasing after pleasure and the running away from pain that fuels the belief in personal doership. The fixation with pleasure and pain is what creates desires and fears. And desires and fears are karmic attachments. And so this is why the ego can be completely dissolved by transcending the belief in personal doership. But this is not an easy thing to do, because personal doership is the most deeply ingrained belief that the mind has. But all spiritual practices are for the purpose of helping one go beyond the mind. And the mind is really only concerned with two things: the acquiring of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. But pain and pleasure are two sides of the same coin. If you want to acquire pleasure, you have to do so by avoiding pain. And if you want to avoid pain, you have to do so by chasing pleasure. The two are tied in duality, and one will always lead to the other. So for this reason, Karma Yoga says, just cease all identification with the body's actions and realize that pain and pleasure are being delivered to you according to the divine destiny. So allow pleasure and pain to come and go as they please. This is the only way to break out of the prison of karma. And it's even written in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 9, that the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Meaning, man only thinks he is the doer, but all of his actions are done according to the divine power. Ramana Maharshi, when asked about Karma Yoga, had the following to say. Karma Yoga is that yoga in which the person does not arrogate to himself the function of being the actor. The actions go on automatically. Action without the sense of doership. Time is the illusion that everything has not already happened. But every single action in the universe can be traced back to the Big Bang. Everything depends on everything else. It is all intimately connected. So to believe that you act independently from life, according to your own separate will, is like setting up a line of dominoes. The entire domino effect is a chain reaction, where each domino is simply responding to the movement of the previous domino. But then, the second to last domino in the line celebrates by saying, I have done it! I have knocked over the final domino. This is the arrogance of the ego. In personal doership, every action is done with selfish intent. It is always about self-preservation or self-enhancement. And when we live this way, we cut ourselves off from the power of life. Non-doership, then, is the understanding that every wave has the whole ocean behind it. It is impossible for any wave to move in opposition to the ocean's will. Your whole life has been predestined already, and so everything that happens to you must be accepted as destiny itself. And when this happens, you join yourself to the power of the whole ocean. I call this the circle of power. Every action has the entire universe behind it, just as every wave has the whole ocean behind it. But when an action happens and it is claimed by an actor, the power of that action is cut off and redirected to either guilt or pride. The guilt and pride then refuels that action, and the action becomes even more distorted and selfish. This is the circle of karma, and this is how dysfunctional behaviors develop, such as addiction, insecurity, pride,
unhealthy habits, and so forth. Personal doership separates you from the flow of life and causes all actions to become increasingly egocentric. But when an action happens and it lands on pure awareness, that action remains connected with the power of life. That power is then directed back into the action, causing it to become increasingly powerful, connected, efficient, and dynamic. This is the circle of power. When there is no belief in an independent actor doing the actions, the power of life takes over and performs the actions with perfect intelligence. This is what we call the flow state. We perform at our very best, and we feel a sense of indescribable joy. The flow state is the state of bliss. And through practicing non-doership, we can learn to live in the flow as our natural abiding state. The ego will always interpret non-doership to mean that you are a puppet on a string, being controlled by life, that life is cruel and unfair because it's only given you the illusion of free will, but in fact has taken it all for itself. Yet this is only a distraction from the true message of non-doership, which is simply this: the dream character is not separate from the dreamer. In fact, only the dreamer exists. There is only the force itself, the one mind, and I am that. There is no me being controlled by an outside force. You are the force.
Now that we have a better understanding of the message of non-doership, let's talk about our practice for this week. If karma is created by the belief in personal doership, then what is it that can undo the karma that we've created? And the answer is forgiveness. Forgiveness is the only thing that shortens the need for karmic experience in this life. So whenever we forgive ourselves for an action that happened through us, that is essentially us declaring, I am not the doer. God is the doer, and nothing happens outside of His will. That was only a lesson to teach me that I am not separate from life. And so the flow of life is always delivering us the exact experiences we need to trigger our unconscious conditioning patterns so that we can see them in the light of awareness and forgive them. This is how we break out of the circle of karma and join ourselves with the circle of power. If and when a hurtful comment or a selfish reaction comes out of the person, the response should only be, thank you, life, for showing me that that response was always in me. And now I see it and I forgive it. Feeling guilty for the actions of the body is the ego's ultimate trick and weapon to keep you trapped in the circle of karma, repeating the same actions and habits again and again, and more importantly, remaining cut off from the circle of power. So our mantra for this week will be, I am being lived. You will put this mantra on your smartphone and repeat it to yourself inwardly and meditate upon it as often as possible throughout the week. And the practice for this week will be to set 3 alarms on your smartphone each day, one at 12 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m., with a notification that says, I am being lived. And when each alarm goes off, just spend a couple of minutes contemplating and considering how every action that happened through you in these previous hours was actually determined by the flow of life and events that were outside of your control. That no action happened independently, and that nobody was consciously choosing any of it. And then, if any unpleasant actions had taken place, take a moment to forgive those actions and thank the source for showing you something that you needed to see. We'll provide you with a 10-minute guided meditation to do each morning that will help to reinforce this understanding that you are not living your life, but life is living you. Everything that life delivers you is for your highest good. And this week we will free ourselves from the endless cycle of pain and pleasure, desires and fears, to discover that our true self stands beyond both. You cannot imagine what a joy it is to be set free from the bondage of guilt and pride. What peace it brings to be liberated from the burdens of desire and fear. But through non-doership, we can rest in a deeper place of awareness, observing how the flow of life is orchestrating our every step. We no longer need to plan and strategize everything we're going to do and going to say, but we can live with a deep, abiding trust in the divine power. To believe that I am something separate from life is to forget myself, to be lost in a dream of separation, the dream of death and rebirth. But this week, we will begin to remember who we are, because there is no pleasure greater than knowing the self, and no pain worse than forgetting it. To remember that I am life itself. I am the ocean, not the wave. I am the dreamer of the dream. I am the force. I am being lived.